Let me tell you a little bit about a guy that does have it together. David Sarita. His first aspiration in life was to become an astronaut. In 1968, David and a friend witnessed a UFO. Oh, boy. He witnessed a UFO along with hundreds of other witnesses. After this experience, David grew up as a UFO enthusiast, never living in doubt of the phenomena that has swept the world since the Roswell incident in 1947. His interest in space, religion, philosophy, astronomy, and science led him on his career in related fields. He has worked deeply in high technology, on environmental and humanitarian issues, and as a professional photographer for over 20 years, he has studied world religion, science, physics, and paranormal psychology for over 25 years. Website, www.davidsarita.net, and you can start there. That's a good start. And we're going to get back to it. And folks, just for the record, I've got lots of guests who, the guest and I don't agree politically, but we put that aside and we just go ahead with the things that we do. Well, we can talk about without, bickering back and forth. And so that's the way it should be. I don't know. Some people, they just can't handle it, though. They just get so angry. They hate to see, they hate to see me happy. I don't know. Excuse me. It's Friday night, and I've got a great guest. I want to smile a little bit. All right, so let's go ahead and I'll bring my guest on with us. We'll get this thing started. David Sarita returning. So let's go bring him on. Hit the right dial here. Good evening, David. How are you tonight?
Good. Can you hear me well?
I can hear you just fine. It's great to have you back, my friend.
You too.
All right. Well, David, I kind of spun off a little bit of a bio, and I'm not sure you even need too much of an introduction, but if you wouldn't mind, maybe you can fill in a few of the blanks and give a little bit of your background and what led you into this work.
Well, I want to mention that now that we have disclosure of UFOs coming from the Pentagon and 4 U.S. senators who have been behind the operation of sending funding to a private company to investigate UFOs. My story of seeing the UFO in Berkeley in 1968 when I was 7 years old, walking home from Cornell Elementary School, is all the more vindicated because, when you hear stories like this, the mainstream science community has always been so arrogant and pompous that they think, well, it must be a kid's imagination because nothing like that can exist. And now that we see, Navy pilots' testimony chasing flying saucers that can outmaneuver every aircraft on this planet, you can see that the stories that, not only from my childhood, but there are many stories of children who have these encounters and they tell their parents, and their parents tell them it's just an imagination that you're experiencing. So, when something like that happens to you, it changes you at the very beginning. It sets you on a different path. You know that when you look at what mainstream education has to offer you, that you're not going to get an answer. And that led me down a different path in life. And that path was to eventually leave the school system behind and become self-educated and look for the answers. And so I took physics in school, and I took math and astronomy and biology and all those things. But there's a point where you just go, okay, you guys, I know that if I stay in this, rut, I'm not going to get the answers. I may get a job that's very secure, but I'm not going to get the answers. And I want the answer to what I saw and what I experienced in the following weeks behind sleep. I want the answer to that more than I want security in life. And so this is what's happened. Once we've had the disclosure that hit you know, first, actually, this story goes back. I mean, this just broke news in the New York Times a
It
month or so.
it did,
Yeah.
and so you would consider this disclosure, even though I mean we know that we're not alone, but you would consider this disclosure then.
I would consider it disclosure because you have four U.S. senators, Harry Reid being one of them, and then Harry Reid coming forward to the press after the New York Times was the first one to release the story. And we're going to go really deep into this because the press has not looked at
Good.
the proper data. But because the senator then comes forward to verify, yes, we did fund, you know, Bob Bigelow, aerospace company, and, you know, Elizondo, and everyone to look for and investigate UFOs because we know there's a phenomena happening on the planet that we can't explain, Harry Reid said. So what that means is that's disclosure because you have the Senate, four members of the Senate disclosing that it's enough of an issue that they're willing to spend money and resources and time investigating it. To one, if they can get the answer to how these things work, we can improve our air maneuverability and our space-based technology. And I think a lot of the scientists and physicists that are utterly humiliated by the recent disclosure, so humiliated, in fact, that they just pan it in the press as if it's nothing. And that's absurd because just because you don't understand the physics of how something works doesn't mean it isn't happening. But I think the mainstream science community is not the only one that's humiliated. I think the conservatives whom think that all of this stuff is crazy nonsense, I think they're so humiliated because it's been in MSNBC, Rolling Stone, Fox News, I mean, the New York
Yeah.
Times. The list goes on and on and on, and this story keeps getting more and more coverage. So I think there's a lot of people that are badly humiliated right now because now they have to say that all those, you know, people who believe in UFOs who are crackpots are not crackpots, and otherwise they just turned a blind eye to the whole thing. Like the Canadian CBC just had to turn a blind eye to the whole thing because they're so conservative in Canada that they just can't possibly admit that there's anything significant going on here. In fact, the CBC tried to say, well, it could be a lot of things. Like what? Like what? And that's where I think a lot of the people who have interviewed David Fravor, one of the two Navy pilots, but I'm going to go to tonight. I really believe, and this is the abstract, we are dealing with a case. This is a particular case that brought us into disclosure, and one of many that are to come. But we're dealing with craft and beings that are probably existing and have been coexisting under our oceans for potentially over 1,000 years. And I'm going to demonstrate how clear that is. In the original story broke in Fighter Suite magazine in 2015. Okay, March 14, 2015, the article is called There I Was, the X-Files edition. And it was actually Tom DeLonge who made this big announcement, and we're going to go into his announcement and what their real intentions are later. But he's the one who brought the story of the color photograph of what they call the Tic Tac UFO. And he brought it public just before the New York Times released the story. And the New York Times article, one of the stories in the New York Times, I'm just looking at the date on this, was December 16th. So this is, you know, less than a month old. So the first time in history that, first of all, the New York Times has come forward with a story that involves the U.S. senators, the Pentagon, and a private company to investigate UFOs. And before we go into this case, which I believe will convince you that we're dealing with something that comes out of the sea, craft that come out of the sea, you have to understand that, you see, why the Senate decided to fund a private corporation, Bigelow Aerospace, to do this work for the Pentagon is because in all previous ufology and all crash retrievals going all the way back to the Battle of 42 in Los Angeles, which was at the onset of World War II, and I believe just after the invasion of Pearl Harbor, when UFOs were hovering off of I'm trying to remember the name of that area, Huntington Beach, not just north of Huntington Beach. It's actually right off of, I'm trying to remember the name of that town on the coast right there in California, where, the UFOs were hovering, and we shot 1,400 rounds of these UFOs. And according to a really deep investigation, we retrieved 2 crash saucers after, firing rounds at them all night.
Oh, they were shooting at these things.
Shooting at them. It's called the Battle of 42, and there's good photography, video, which used to be Super 8 movie, of the Battle of 42 on YouTube. And, according to the George C. Marshall Memorandum and the Marshall documents, George C. Marshall confiscated 2 crash saucers, and they were taken to Edwards Air Force Base. And that's where you got the beginning of reverse engineering UFOs. And then you come to Roswell, which is 1947, only 5 years later, just after the end of World War II, when we sent 2 nuclear bombs on Japan as punishment for invading us in Pearl Harbor and to end the war. And then you had the Roswell incident and the Plains of St. Augustine incident. There are a number of UFO incidents there. But what was really going on was, you go back to Kenneth Arnold's sighting in June of multiple delta-shaped craft that were flying over Mount Rainier in Washington. Then the Portland, Oregon Press, it was in their main newspaper, they had UFOs over Portland. And then eastern Idaho, I think it was western Idaho, a United Airlines pilot reported seeing the UFOs out their window. So they were going all over the country. From the period of 1942 onwards, there was kind of an invasion of UFOs. And then eventually there's a sighting at Edwards Air Force Base of 8 flying saucers on July the 7th. I have all these documents. Mm-hmm. And then it seems like according to Boyd Bushman at Lockheed Martin, my friend Boyd, when I interviewed him, he had testimony from a Navy doctor who was treating a young pilot who had just used a super beam weapon called the Tesla Death Ray. And he had just shot down the Roswell flying saucer. And the Roswell saucer gets taken to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and that is exactly where the Tesla Death Ray was developed. According to FBI release files on Nikola Tesla that I'm in possession of, the Tesla Death Ray was in development in 1943. So by 1947, it was pretty advanced weapon. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm saying is there was a division of the Air Force that would confiscate all of the crash retrieved saucers and lock them up in secure facilities that no president and no senator could touch. There have only been a few politicians that are part of the secret government that have gotten to the point where they reverse engineered this technology, and they were able to create a breakaway government civilization that is literally so secretive that the public has no idea that NASA is just a smokescreen, useless space program that is only designed to satisfy the public that we're pursuing space. But the point is, Congress, the Senate nor the House had any access to these programs, except maybe later we had Barry Goldwater, in Arizona, and we had Dwight Eisenhower, as a president of the United States in the beginning, had access to it. And when Eisenhower was about to disclose this to the public, he was silenced, and the secret government was slowly breaking away from us, the public. And once the secret shadow government broke away from us, they were able to those trillions of missing dollars in U.S. Government spending that had been documented even recently. That's how they were able to fund the secret space program, but they're not part of our government, so our government couldn't touch them. And I believe Senator Harry Reid and the other three senators who decided to fund this UFO operation through the Pentagon, they knew that they couldn't get in. They knew that even they couldn't get in. So they would hire a guy named Bob Bigelow, who was very interested in pursuing and chasing UFOs. But Bigelow didn't have access to direct crash retrieve saucers. So he's left in the dust. And you're basically having to start all over again. But for the first time in history, instead of the Men in Black burying your UFO story, finally it gets channeled through the Senate to the Pentagon to a private corporation so that we would get the story. And that's how we got disclosure. So that's understanding backstory, that we would have had disclosure a long time ago if President Eisenhower was allowed by these very powerful people to tell the public, and we would have had a different world. And Kennedy, it all would have been different.
Well, why are they letting it out now? I mean, why, some people are still convinced that this is some kind of psyop that they're pulling, but why now?
Well, see, some people think it's an operation and it isn't real, and it's just really possibly because we're at the front of World War III with North Korea, Iran, and possibly even Russia, and that they want to make everyone ready to see these things in the event of a war. I mean, in the event of a war, if we brought out this technology, there's no doubt that we could stop anybody in the world. We could stop anybody's missiles, no matter how big and fast they think their missiles are. We could stop them very quickly with this technology. So that's one idea I had. Why are they doing it now? Because the timing is impeccable. And don't think for a minute that Donald Trump has anything to do with North Korea developing nuclear weapons. These guys and these families have been working towards the development of nuclear weapons for a long, long time. And their hatred to the United States goes back to the Korean War. And their idea of seeking revenge against the United States for what the United States did to them in the Korean War, which was killing over 200,000 of them and bombing the heck out of their cities for years. It is a revenge. So each day that Donald Trump lets the North Koreans gain more and more access to developing the range of their weapons, each day we're putting the country in more and more danger.
That's true.
So the fact that all of this rhetoric is coming into Trump, is if he's the one that has anything to do with this guy developing these weapons, is nonsense, because he just happened to become president right when he had developed his weapons. And it's not like he just figured it out because he decided to get mad at Donald Trump. So the UFO disclosure comes right in concert with this, and that is interesting. But this particular story that they're using comes from November of 2004. I was living in Los Angeles editing my Dan Aykroyd Unplugged on UFOs film back then. I was just starting it. And what happens is now this gets really, really mind-bending, because when you look at this article in depth, it appears what they're saying is that it's David Fravor, and this wasn't a one-time incident. It looks like the Navy Carrier Strike Group it says, had been on station for a few weeks already, working to integrate the operations of the carrier with her previous support ships. And they started noticing these UFOs. It says right here, what Dave didn't know was for the past several days, Princeton had been picking up some bizarre returns of their Death Star-worthy Spy 1 radar. On several occasions, the beginning of the 10th of November, so that's 4 days earlier, the fire control officer and the extremely experienced fire control sensor chief had detected multiple returns descending from far above the radar's scan volume, somewhere higher than 80,000 feet. So these things are above 80,000 feet. They're about 46 feet long. The Navy fighters are 60 feet 3 inches, so they're a little bit bigger. And so you have to understand that, so this was going on for several days. So when Dave Fravor and the other pilot come in, they had already been observing these things. And it says the targets were dubbed anomalous aerial vehicles, AAVs, not UFOs, would drop from 80,000 feet or higher to 50,000 feet off the surface of the water in a matter of seconds.
Wow.
And in a matter of seconds puts you at least 10,000 miles an hour. So if you're dropping at 10,000 miles an hour and you just stop, any pilot today would be dead. They would actually liquefy your body. It's kind of like hitting a wall at 10,000 miles an hour. And to give you an example, a bullet coming out of a rifle might be doing 1,500 miles an hour. So imagine what a bullet looks like when it hits a wall at 1,500 miles an hour. Imagine if that's your body. So, but you're talking 10,000 miles an hour and stopping in seconds. So that means that there's no propulsion that we have that a pilot could survive a drop speed and a sudden stop. And it's not only that, the structure of every aircraft that Boeing or Lockheed makes, the materials these things are made out of, and how thin the wall is, it would crumble. The actual structure of these fighters would crumble stopping at 10,000 miles an hour. Even if it took you 10 seconds to stop, it would crumble. So you would have to use something like graphene, which is 200 times stronger than steel, and we haven't developed graphene yet to make fighters out of. So there's no way that anything we have can do this. And then there's two pieces of footage that we saw at the New York Times, and the second piece of footage shows at the end, the UFO, the AAVs they call it, just takes off like a bullet. I mean, it just streaks out. And again, a sudden acceleration from even 120 knots to several thousand miles an hour instantly would crush the pilot. It would crush him. Now, I personally did high-altitude skydiving training at Edwards Air Force Base because I've skydived from 30,000 feet above sea level. And the first thing to note is the temperatures outside at 30,000 feet are like minus 70 degrees. So when you're talking about these things going higher than 80,000 feet, they have to withstand unimaginable temperatures. And they also, at the same time, they have to be not only made out of materials that are phenomenal, they have to have a technology that I believe cancels out mass gravity down to zero. And when your mass gravity is down to zero for your pilot and your craft, you can accelerate, stop on a dime, turn right at several, even a million miles an hour turn right, and nothing will happen to you because your mass is zero. And that's the only way this could be happening. If you don't cancel out the gravity and the inertial forces for both the pilot and the craft, then there's no way you can move like this. And that point alone, right there, is so impossible for our physics community to understand. It goes right over their heads. They don't understand how you can reduce the mass gravity of any material object to zero. And so we just think of increasing propulsion energies and to go faster. But the problem is today's propulsion right now, you can't really push a pilot's body any harder than we already are. You can't really do it.
So they would need their own, like, these crafts then would be in, like, their own gravity fields, force fields?
No, see, that's the other idea. One day I was sitting at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab up on the hill above the University of California, Berkeley campus. I was sitting there with Bogdan Magwitch, who's a nuclear fusion scientist and a particle physicist, and Glenn Seaborg. And Seaborg and his assistant were having lunch with Magwitch, and I got to be there. And Seaborg was the chairman of the Atomic Energy Commission under 3 presidents. So he authorized all of the nuclear tests under Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon for the development of the nuclear bomb. And he won the Nobel Prize cooperatively for co-discovering the explosive uranium isotopes that led to the actual nuclear weapons that we drop today. So I'm sitting there with him, and actually he authorized, it was in 1968, so that would have been the same year I saw the UFO in Berkeley, at the Nuclear Rocket Development Station in Nevada. A company named EG&G developed a rocket called Phobos 2A, and Phobos means Mars moon, right? That's the name of Mars's moon. The most powerful nuclear reactor for space propulsion is successfully tested. Successfully tested means that a nuclear rocket, totally different than what NASA uses today, much more powerful, with the destination being Mars, was successfully tested. And then EG&G took this news and they blacked it out. And the public and Congress had no idea where this technology went next. So we have what are called heavy ion propulsion drive systems that can send spacecraft at incredible speeds, but you have to accelerate the pilot very slowly to get up to speeds that are incredible speeds that can, for example, when I worked for Magwitch in nuclear fusion, I was on the phone regularly with Earl Van Landingham, who was the head of all space access and technology for NASA, and back then he was the head of all propulsion for NASA. And he was interested, Earl Van Landingham was interested in Magwitch's fusion technology, and I was doing all the communications with NASA and Van Landingham. And they wanted it because Magwitch's fusion drive could not only produce unlimited power, but it didn't have any radiation. And he said it could send spacecraft up to 1/10 the speed of light. But using helium protons, helium charged particles, that had a huge energy on them of 18 million electron volt charges, he said you could do 1/10 the speed of light, which I think is 67 million miles an hour. But it's very slow acceleration because the helium particles are very light, right? But what Seaborg was doing at the Nuclear Rocket Development Station in Nevada under EG&G in the 60s was heavy ion propulsions, which mean you could accelerate very quickly, but the pilot would not be able to handle it. So knowing that we probably could, with this 1960s nuclear propulsion drives, already be on Mars, we might even have bases on Mars.
Yeah.
They still don't match this particular case of being able to drop at least at 10,000 miles an hour and stop in seconds. You can't do that because we don't know how to cancel out mass gravity for the pilot and the craft. So it gets more interesting as we follow this story in the Fighter Suite magazine. And the guy who's writing this is a co-pilot he has all the greatest respect for David Fravor and the other pilot, whose name is, I think his name is Cheeks. They call him Cheeks. And they start to literally describe in this article that the UFOs, there's one case, I think it's David Fravor who's following it. Let me just see where it is. They see what he thinks is a UFO under the water, just above the surface, and the rest of the sea is perfectly calm, clear day, no waves, glassy, glassy sea. You're talking about just off the coast of Ensenada in Baja California, Ensenada, Mexico. You're about 100 miles off the coast from Ensenada, from what I can determine from their data. And they said the UFOs kept appearing in the same spot, and there were fleets of them. And in this particular case, he called what he called white water. It looked like there was something just below the surface, he said, like a shoal, or what he'd heard a ship sinking rapidly would look like. But as he flies around and looks at this thing, they know that there's no missing ship sinking, there's no planes that are missing, and they see this round shape that's several, he said 50 to 100 meters across the turbulent water. So this is a UFO under the surface of the water, is what I'm saying. So it's really amazing what he's seeing. And I'm amazed that the rest of the media has missed this, because this is a submergible UFO.
Did they miss it, or are they ignoring it?
Well, they didn't refer to the original Fighter Sweep article, which has all the testimony in great detail of everything that had happened. So what you call these, I think they're called USOs. They're unidentified submergible objects. And so what this means is when we go back, there's a color picture of what they say is the UFO. So we're not even at the infrared photography yet, because that's going to get more interesting. And this particular color photograph is at the top of the article on the fightersweep.com from March 14th, 2015. And this is the Tic Tac. This is when they went public with this story in the New York Times. This was the photograph that the whole team from To the Stars Academy with Tom DeLonge used up on the screen. I watched his live Facebook presentation. So this is a photograph of it. So I took this thing into Photoshop and I zoomed in on it, and you can see this thing looks in every way like an aquatic craft. The tail looks like a giant whale tail. It has a long midsection, and then it has a head. But it's, when you look down, it's in the midsection of the UFO. This thing is got metallic structure, but it's shaped like a whale or like a ship, because it has a bow, kind of a bow shape in the middle of it. But why a tail? And how can this thing outperform our aircraft in every way, but yet it looks like a fish? It literally looks like a giant fish. So, but at 46 feet, it's right in line to be the size of something like a gray whale, because gray whales get, 40 feet.
Yeah, it's huge. I seen it. Now, where can people go if they want to see the photo? Well, I did watch the video today. I should have took some snapshots of it.
Well, there's the video presentation that I gave. You could send people, but
okay.
You go to fightersweep.com/1460/X-files-edition. And that's where the article is. Or just go to fightersweep.com and Google, X-Files edition, because this article is written by another pilot. It's another pilot who wrote this whole story. So this was the most detailed account of what we're talking about that led to the disclosure. But everybody seemed to miss the part about this thing being aquatic, foaming under the surface of the water. And he's flying his jet around perfectly clear skies. And then yet later, it's actually later when you come to the infrared photography, where the two pilots are around 25,000 feet above the ocean, and then they're chasing the UFO, and then you hear their voices talking about them on their intercom. Now, I want to point something out here, because there's a rumor that John Lear is saying that this footage is fake because he hears the background noise. And I don't know how much in a fighter pilot doesn't fly in a pressurized cockpit, and that's because they do very severe nose dives, and they pressure, depressure, pressure, depressure. So the pilot is wearing a pressure suit, and as soon as you go above 15,000 feet, I did my high altitude oxygen training at Edwards Air Force Base. They put you in a pressure chamber where they train pilots how to go high altitude. And they tested me, and they tested all of us before we could, as civilians, skydive from 30,000 feet. And what happens is that you're wearing an oxygen mask, and the air intake makes noise. So as soon as you're above 15,000 feet, you have to have oxygen. The pilot has to if he's going to go high altitude, he has to pre-breathe pure oxygen for an hour before he can even go up there. So these guys had air intake valves on their mask, and so you would hear that. It would make a sound. And I've looked at a lot of footage of pilots flying with their fighter jets on, and there's lots of background noise. So I don't know why John Weir is saying that this footage is fake, because it would be perfectly quiet in the guy's helmet. I had a helmet on with an oxygen system on, and you can hear that oxygen coming in. It's not silent. I really believe this is real photography. And when you get to the technologies they're using, they're actually getting multiple detections on radar as well as on the infrared. Some of the radar detections were quite weak, meaning these things were nearly stealth, but they could see them on the radar. Now, this is important because, believe it or not, the company called Raytheon, the defense contractor Raytheon, built the forward-looking infrared camera systems that these pilots were using. And they recently published an article bragging. It says, the UFO spotter, this is right on Raytheon's website, Navy pilots use Raytheon technology to track a strange UFO. And the funny thing about the article is you can see that the Raytheon company did not read the fighter sweep article because they said it may not be a real UFO unless you can match it on 2 or more systems. Now, when you read the fighter sweep article, it's very clear that they detected the UFOs on multiple systems, multiple detection systems, from optical to radar to even, they have some pretty amazing detection systems on these planes. So why did Raytheon make a mistake like that? Probably because they're trying to discredit it being a UFO. And they also don't acknowledge that it was definitely a craft that these guys detected. Now, there's no way it can be a bird, because a bird, even though Canadian geese can be seen flying at 25,000 feet on rare occasions. In November at 25,000 feet in Baja, California, it's got to be at least minus 40. I know from high altitude skydiving, when I jumped, it was minus 70 outside. But you're only in it for a minute, right? So you drop, you're dropping. I'm skydiving at 300 miles an hour in the upper atmosphere, and then when I hit the lower atmosphere, it's like jumping into a lake. It becomes very turbulent. So you're out of the cold in 1 minute because you're falling so fast.
1 minute may be all it takes for me.
Oh yeah, no, 1 minute at minus 70 with wind chill. When you add the wind chill, it's actually way worse.
Oh, God.
So the point is, there's no birds up there. That's what in November, you're not going to see a bird, and a bird is not 40 feet across. And that's one of the funny things about some of the press articles and the scientists like Neil deGrasse Tyson saying, well, it could have been anything. What do you mean? First of all, it's not a balloon, because a balloon can't accelerate, and you can't do 10,000 miles an hour. It can't even do, forget about a balloon even doing a couple hundred miles an hour. There's just no way. And I think these pilots know what balloons look like.
Yeah.
And a 40-foot balloon would be one heck of a balloon. A 46-foot balloon would be one heck of a balloon. So forget about it. High altitude balloons, they know what those things look like. And it's funny that, on these news interviews, when they interview the scientists, well, it could have been anything, like, what do you mean?
Yeah.
Tell me what you mean by anything. Because there's nothing up there at that. When I skydived from 30,000 feet, there's nothing out there. I mean, absolutely nothing. And if I hit something like a duck at 300 miles an hour, I'd be in pretty bad shape. But there's just nothing out there. So
Yeah.
when they say it could be anything, what do you mean there's lots of stuff? Like 25,000 feet, like birds everywhere and balloons are all over the place. Tell me about it. How did the balloon do, 10,000 miles an hour, and how did it suddenly accelerate? And that's what mainstream, see, when they're humiliated, they just don't know how to look at this. But see, when I look at the idea that we have aquatic craft, okay, I personally know that from living in Malibu, California, Topanga, Malibu, California, that in California, in the 90s, there were cases of large numbers of UFOs coming out of the Pacific, and people saw them come right out of the ocean. And one time I was on a plane coming back from Maui, Hawaii, and I was on a plane with this huge Hawaiian guy who was in the Navy, actually. And this guy was like twice the size of me. I'm 6 feet tall, and he's telling me how him and his dad in the fishing boats in Hawaii, he's a pure Hawaiian, they would see these UFOs come out of the sky, and they would go under the water, and they wouldn't even make a splash. And he would see them glowing under the water at nighttime when they were fishing at nighttime. The Hawaiians would see this. And
Yeah.
we also have accounts even here in the Kootenays of British Columbia where people have seen UFOs go into these lakes. Some of these lakes are over 1,000 feet deep.
Any speculation of who these beings or crafts, who they are, where they're coming from?
Well, see, I think if you go back, now, see, you have to go into, there are areas of archaeology that we call mythology, because a myth is something that has a story, but it doesn't have any supposed scientific evidence. But in the case of ancient Babylon, in 2,500 years before Christ, which is also right in the time of the ancient Egyptian civilizations, which may go back even much further than that, there's a case of a fish god who goes by many different names. The Greeks called him Oines, and he is described in an ancient Babylonian document called the Berosus. You can Google this, Fragments of Berosus. And this is really old material where a god comes out of the sea, and he's a merman, but he has feet, and he can walk around the ground. He teaches humans architecture, geometry, how to build buildings, and how to even produce higher levels of agriculture. And he doesn't eat our food, and this is the account in the Berosus. And he dives back into the sea at sunset, and then they see him again the next day, and he teaches the humans. And he's one of the founders of the early civilizations. And there are women mermaids and mermen that, if you go back into the, even some of the stories of the first ships that crossed the Atlantic, the passengers on the ship have actually documented accounts of the mermaids. So if we go also to the idea of Plato's Atlantis and Lemuria, which was a civilization off the coast of California, and how after a period of great earthquakes, when Atlantis was destroyed and Lemuria were destroyed, there are accounts in Atlantis of the mermen living in cooperation with the humans that only had feet and hands. So is it possible, I ask, that what we're seeing off the coast of California are UFOs that carry passengers that may even be interstellar, probably to the star Sirius, where Robert Temple, who wrote, the British astronomer who wrote the book The Sirius Mystery, this is a very famous book, massive cult following for The Sirius Mystery, they have symbols of UFOs with fish's tails in here called the Nomos. And this tribe in Mali, Northwest Africa, the Dogon tribe, brought this knowledge from pre-dynastic Egypt because the knowledge was under attack from the new pharaohs and the new kings of Egypt. And they moved the knowledge to Mali, Northwest Africa, where they keep it to this day, of the star system of Sirius, and Sirius having a B and a C star that have this elliptical, I think it's a 50-year orbit, which NASA proved later is actually true, that the B star of Sirius does have an elliptical 50-year orbit. And Robert Temple says that they are aquatic, meaning they are mermen type beings, and they travel between Sirius and Earth. And in this book, this whole book, he demonstrates, I mean, this is a classic British astronomer who decides to become mythical, and he starts to believe in the myth, and that these mermen came from Sirius, and they've been able to travel between their star, which is very close to us, at 8.7 light years away. And they've been going back and forth for thousands of years, and he documents it during the time of the goddess Isis. The goddess Isis, her name literally means Sirius. The star Sirius is also supposed to have been, possibly, according to when you read Robert Temple, a woman, and her husband Osiris could have been merman type beings that were able to survive in Earth. So is it possible, I'm saying, in this case of the Navy pilot, we have clear testimony that these UFOs were buzzing them for over a week, and they say in the same spot in the Fighter Sweeps article, they just kept dropping out of the sky, stopping above the sea, and we have the one account of the UFO foaming just under the surface of the water, and he tries to get his plane closer and it's gone, which means it went way under the sea. Another name for the fish god was Dagon, and that's interesting because you have the Dogon tribe in Africa who keep the knowledge about the Syrian star system, and the god of the Philistines was Dagon, and he's mentioned in the Bible as being a fish man. Mm-hmm. He's actually, so we call that a myth, right? Because we say nobody today has any proof of mermaids, and our planet is 2/3 ocean, 2/3. And in the Mariana Trench, the water's as deep as 35,000 feet.
Well, you know, I thought that documentary that, was it the Animal Planet or one of those stations did not long ago. There was a lot of controversy over it. People said it was fake. And I don't know, I thought it was real. You know,
what was that about? About mermaids?
Yeah, about mermaids actually, you know, existing in the ocean. I mean, why not? I mean, they could be from somewhere else. Maybe that's why they park in the ocean, right?
Maybe, and not only that, radar is useless in the ocean. And sonar, which is what the Navy uses to detect submarines and vessels at sea, is not, it can't travel very far. And it's much slower than radar. So radar is microwaves, which work for detecting aircraft and UFOs in the sky that are solid, that are not stealth. But a lot of these UFOs are stealth. They can absorb all the radar photons that hit them, and they don't bounce any back. And so even those are useless to radar. But under the ocean, radar is useless. and that protects them tremendously at great distances under the sea. And if they're able to if they were able to develop materials, remember the god Oins is teaching humans how to build buildings. If they had a material even like graphene, they could be building structures so deep in the ocean where humans just can't go because the pressures down there are too heavy, and they would crush most of what our vehicles are made out of. But if they're able to build cities and domes under the ocean with materials that can withstand millions and millions of times more pressure than the materials we've developed, then they would go unnoticed. You would never see them. And because you can't use radar down there, you can only use sonar. But our submarines, I wonder, I don't know. I'd actually have to research how deep our submarines could go. But the volume of the ocean is 2/3 of the planet is ocean. So you think of how many submarines do we have, and how many cases does the Navy have of getting signals or detecting things under the ocean that we don't know about? I mean, we don't know.
Well, yeah, that's true, and I have that picture up on screen now for folks if they want to. If they're over on the watching the YouTube end of things. There it is. Now that's the Tic Tac UFO?
Yeah, the blue one is the Tic Tac, but I believe if you look at it closely, it has the tail, a fish-type tail. It's kind of hexagonal, and then it has the long white. It's all white, and then the white midsection, and then the head. And notice it's kind of bow-shaped, which is kind of how you would make a ship, right?
Yeah.
You know, you always have a little bit of an arc in your ship. And so it reminds me of a ship or a whale of some type, but it has a flat top. And so this thing could probably even float on the surface of the water. But it appears, according to the Navy pilot, and I should find that exact description where he is describing the actual encounter with it under the water.
Yeah,
so
if you got it, that'd be great.
It says right here, the sea was calm, almost glassy smooth, and it was late morning on a beautiful Southern California day. Perfect conditions. As Cheeks flew over the spot, he saw a disturbance on the surface of the ocean, a round section of turbulent water about 50 to 100 meters in diameter. That's pretty big, because those are meters, so that's like 300 feet. It was the only area and type of what he called whitewater described that it looked as if there was something below the surface, like a shoal, or what he had heard a ship sinking rapidly would look like. He overflew the disturbance and circled back in the direction of the Nimitz, which is the aircraft carrier, without ever seeing what caused the water to froth. As he turned away, which happened to be the moment of the Super Hornets converging on the location. The Super Hornets are the fighters, the fighter jets. The whitewater cleared and the ocean surface returned to its smooth state. The spot of the previous disturbance was completely indiscernible. So that means the thing must have gone way into the ocean. And then it says a few thousand feet below him, Dave, the other pilot. So we have two pilots. We have Dave Fravor and we have Cheeks. So it says here, a few thousand feet below him, Dave had gone through the similar surreal experience of being asked by Princeton if the fast Eagle jets were carrying any ordinances, meaning missiles. Because guess what? They wanted to shoot at him. Dave's baffled WSO reported that all they had were two captive-carrying training missiles. They were given bearing and range vectors to a set of coordinates and told to investigate an unknown aerial contact over that spot, but they had no ordinances to shoot it, so they couldn't shoot the UFO.
Yeah.
But the UFO is too fast. I mean, their missiles would be way too slow. With no further information on the contact, they descended to the low 20s, meaning 20,000 feet, and scanned with radar, picking nothing up. Neither plane in its flight was carrying a FLIR pod, which limited the type of sensors they could search with. But both planes were brand new in Dave's words. They still had a new car smell. The APG-73 radars were both new, and performed perfectly during the previous hour's training. Yet the screens from both planes were clean all the way to the point Princeton called the merge plot. But they had described earlier seeing these things on radar, because we know that they would see them on radar coming from above 80,000 feet, which was the extent of their radar, right? So then it says later the case where the two pilots go out again and they have the forward-looking infrared. And those forward-looking infrared cameras see them, and they're able to chase them for a while. And that's the footage we've all seen. Now, in that footage, the infrared footage, which is in the New York Times article, it's not in this article. You have to understand, at 25,000 feet, the air temperature in November is probably, at least, from my experience, because I had to take temperature training for high altitude skydiving, I would say at least minus 35 outside. And so that's amazingly cold, which means on infrared photography, everything looks black and gray. So when you see something white, which they do, the Tic Tac is white, it means there's energy there. But the pilot mentions in this article there is no exhaust heat, because you'd see white exhaust heat.
Yeah.
So it's not using jet engines. It's not using ion thrust, as we described earlier. It's not using a nuclear propulsion drive, because that would show up as thrust vapor, which would be white. But it has a magnetic field around it. When they switch the camera to visible mode, you can see this glowing magnetic field around it, which is not a spot point reflection from the sun, because it is a sunny day. And a sunny reflection is a spot. It's not a uniform glowing field. So these things are ionizing the electrons in the atoms around them, in the envelope around them, and they're giving off a certain amount of light in the visible spectrum in daytime. And that right there tells us that we don't have anything like that in our arsenal of propulsion for missiles. And when you talk about drones, I mean, go look at our drones, people. I've looked at them. They're all winged aircraft. These are not winged aircraft. And drones don't use anti-gravity, and drones don't accelerate to 10,000 miles an hour. In fact, I don't think we have any drones that can do 10,000 miles an hour.
It looks like they can get anything they want off the ground. I mean, if they wanted to get somebody's house and fly through space with it, it almost looks like they could do it. I mean, look at the shape of that thing.
I know, and notice how uniform the white is. So that's heat, right? Because that's infrared, which means there's energy there, but it's not escaping the container. So whatever the containment is, they have no escape heat. And all of our propulsion means have escape heat, which you can see as white vapor dust. So this thing is not ours. And Tom DeLonge has gone as far as having conversations with President Trump, I'm told, in telling him it could be the Russians. And that could literally trigger so much animosity between the United States and Russia, if the president believes it, that they're not aliens, then we could trigger a war with Russia because we believe they have these things.
Well, the good thing is that we have a president who does kind of lean to the side of some of these, what people would call conspiracy theories. So, you know, hopefully, I trust that he might take a little extra, you know, he might keep both eyes open looking at this rather than, you know.
Oh, I think he's heard about it. Of course, it's been in every newspaper in the world. He hasn't publicly commented on it yet. We're told by the White House press secretary that he does know about it. But like I said, in the past, there's no president that has ever had access. So this would be the first time that we know of where a president has seen a UFO case file that comes from the Pentagon and congressional funding from 4 senators and 2 trained Navy pilots. See, it says at the end of this article, and this article is by Paco Chicheri. He flew an AE-6 Intruders and F-14A Tomcats during his 10-year active duty career. He flew the F-5 Tiger II and a further 10 years as a bandit current with his employment as a commercial pilot. Paco is currently a 737 captain. He's the creator and producer of the award-winning naval aviation documentary Speed and Angels, and he regularly contributes to Fighter Sweep. So he's the one who wrote this article. So we have a pilot who wrote the article, and he has the utmost respect for the two pilots that he's talking about in this case of the UFOs. So he's quite puzzled by it himself as an author. But the point is very clear in this article that now the president and now members of Congress, all the 400 and something members of Congress, have access to this news, and they probably have more data than we have in these cases. But what I would like to see is one, I'd like to see these pilots interviewed by somebody like me in my line of questioning, because the people who are interviewing them on the news are laughable. This is the only good interview with the pilots right here on Fighter Sweep. There's no better interview than this, and I'm only giving you snippets of how good this article is. So if you really want to get, and this is one UFO case, and I think it's very likely that if we had a breakaway civilization living on our own planet with this type of technology, that they could easily live here, even in our high mountain ranges, and we would never know, because they don't use the landscape that we use.
I see. All right, David. Well, listen, hang on there. We're up for a break, so hang on with us for about 4 or 5 minutes here, and we'll take this break. We'll come back and talk some more about all this. And folks, if you've got questions, you can get them to me in the chat room at latenightinthemidlands.com, or from YouTube, get them to a moderator. Moderator will get them to me. The other way is you can call in 803-339-2559, Skype ID LNM Radio for those who can't do it any other way. So, folks, hang on with us. My guest, David Sarita. I'm Michael Vera. We'll be back in just a few minutes this Friday night here on the LNM Radio Network. Hang in there, folks. We will be back. All right, folks, we are back. This is Late Night in the Midlands. I'm Michael Vera. My guest, David Sarita. And, wow, disclosure, folks. I mean, you know, some look at it as though, yeah, it's here. Me and even David, I'm sure, you know, I didn't need anybody to roll out a red carpet and tell me, but it's nice to see it coming out. And some people do question it, and I guess we should question everything, right? So we'll take your questions in just a few minutes. 803-392-2559, also in our chat room. So get them to us, and we'll get them to our guests. Now, I do want to give a shout out to some radio affiliates. High Point Radio, the top of New Jersey. They bring us into New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania, doing it on 100.5 FM, 1620 AM, Monday through Friday. Thank you so much. WCET 101.7 FM, Columbia, South Carolina, Columbia Talk. Also, YouTube, that's where we simulcast. We also simulcast on iTunes and TuneIn and Twitch and Dailymotion. And, well, we broadcast from the LNM Radio Network. That is the mothership of all that we do. And the good news is it's not just Late Night in the Midlands, but many other hosts with many other shows doing many other topics. So we've got a wide variety of stuff for you on the LNM Radio Network. So feel free to go on over anytime, 24/7, and take a listen. I do understand today the servers have been having some problems due to the snowstorms. So when I finish here tonight, there's a possibility you might just get music until things get fixed. But they're working on it. Hopefully they can get things straightened out. But it hasn't affected the live shows, which is really good. So anyways, with that, the website's www.latenightinthe Go on over, become a member, be informed, and by all means, inform others, folks. We can use you, so help us out. And as I do a lot of nights, a little incentive if you want to donate, a $100 donation, and we'll give you a choice between one of two things. We've got here the smartwatch, which I personally have no use for, but some people like that stuff, and the car dashboard cam. So, well, you know, for those who are waiting for Planet X to come and end the world, who knows? You might capture the video. And when those aliens come from another place and another time, and they want to know what the heck happened, who knows? It might be your camera footage that they find. But yeah, so you could choose between those, and I'll give you a signed copy of my book, Lessons from the Other Side, and a little incentive for donating. And folks, because it is you that keeps us on the air, and we are thankful for it. And we do the best we can to show it by bringing you the best guests with the best information. And let's get back to one of our best guests, David Sarita. All right, David, we are back, and I do have somebody on the phone line, and if you're ready, we can hit that, and then I think I got some questions in the chat, and we can go from there.
Okay.
All right. In Michigan, 248 area code. You are first. Who do we have?
Hi, Michael Vera. This is Cheryl Mollencup, and hi, David Sarita.
Hi.
Happy New Year. And I'm glad that you're on the show tonight. I have a question for you. Is it just me, or have you ever, the story Jonah and the whale?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's always been my thought that I don't think that was a whale.
Hey, that's an amazing thought right there. Because how did he spend all those nights in the belly of a whale? Like that doesn't add up, does it?
Hey, you're on to something there.
And be able to tell the story afterwards.
Yeah, no, that would actually be impossible because you couldn't breathe in there. And so, that's a really amazing observation you made. Thanks for pointing that out, because as I look at the picture of Tic Tac, it looks, again, let me just read you something from the fighter's sweep. It says right here, in his brief comments, Dave Fravor, the pilot of the Hornet, his WSO and the other true crew states the object had initially been hovering like a Harrier jet. So they saw it hover and not move. And again, they didn't see any thrust or exhaust, and it has no wings. They described it as uniformly white, about 46 feet long, and they say roughly fighter sized, but that's also whale sized. So when you think of Jonah and the whale, and you think of this thing, when you look at the picture and its midsection, it seems to have ribbing. They say here having a discernible midline horizontal axis like a fuselage, but having no visible windows, nacelles, wings, or propulsion systems. But remember,
right.
Okay, these guys, they saw it with their eyes, they saw it on radar, and they also saw it on the forward-looking infrared, which is strange for Raytheon to say that they only saw it on the infrared once, and that means Raytheon didn't read this article, and they didn't interview the pilots. And it's interesting to me that Raytheon would publish an article without interviewing the pilots in massive detail, because we can see here that it says here there were two other crews stated the object had been hovering like a Harrier. So there's the crew of Dave and his co-pilot, and it's not his co-pilot, but the other tandem pilot, and then there's two other crews. So there were a lot of guys looking at this thing. But the idea of it being even shaped like a whale with the tail on the end, and I've looked at that and brought it into Photoshop, and they're very angular shapes. I count 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 angles per side of the tail. So that would be 8 angles on both sides of the tail. And then it has the long midsection and the nose, and then it's curved. Now, I'm going to show you something else that looks like this later, but you can see kind of ribbings and what look like windows or portals, and they don't describe that. Now, I know when they were flying optically, they could see it from the top down because it was hovering above the water in one case and under the water in another case. But there you go. You know, the caller is really quite brilliant. I mean, it doesn't, you know, that's why it seems like a myth, the case of Jonah and the whale. Because
it wasn't a myth. That, I believe it was a true story.
That's what I mean.
That was the only way he
it
had
sounds
to,
like a myth because we can't imagine him surviving.
That was the only way he knew how to describe what happened to him. I mean,
right,
because
it's a whale is a metaphor. Just like if you look at the picture of this thing, it looks like a whale. But
absolutely, and if you're from you know, an earlier time and you see this, how else would you describe it, right?
A flying whale.
Yeah. So amazing.
And to be able to travel under the water, you need those aspects for the aerodynamic, you know, to be aerodynamically, you know.
Yeah.
Well, it doesn't need aerodynamics in the air because it flies so fast.
Well, no, aerodynamics in the water.
Yeah,
because, you know, to swim smoothly, you need to, you know, you need a certain style. You need a certain way that you move, a certain
and that's
way
what
that
it looks
angled.
like. It looks like a submarine kind of thing. It's something that is submergible. You're right. As soon as it gets into the water, it can't use its anti-gravity technology. It might use part of that, but its ability to go super fast. I've actually read reports of classified Navy ships that are able to go super fast in water using some very advanced forms of creating a field around the bow of a ship, like sending out pulses to break the water in front of it so it can go faster through the water. And I can imagine these things could go really fast through the water, but it still has to have, exactly like you're saying, some form of aquadynamics to move through the water and maybe even float on the surface of the water, because the way it's shaped is like a ship that would be floating on the water.
I'm going to say, maybe it moves like a whale. You never know when it gets in the water.
Being a swimmer, I kind of understand that sort of aerodynamically correct positions and things like that.
Well, you make us look good, because I always say we have the smartest listeners on the planet, and so that was good. Thank you.
You know, I'm going to have to reread Jonah and the whale in the Bible. I'm going to have to, because with your insight, I think you have something. And like I said, we have the case from the Babylonian god, Dagon, and also known as
tribe.
Right, and so if they have accounts of the aqua beings that could interact with humans, like I said, they could have been living here for thousands of years, or maybe because we know their ships fly at incredible speed.
Isn't it the Dogon tribes that they make the Chiquina dolls? Yeah,
the Kachina dolls are made by the Hopi, but the Dagon tribe, the Dogon tribe in Africa are the keepers of the knowledge of the Syrian.
From the pole. Correct. They're the ones that get dressed up really nice and swing from the pole.
Well, they do that in Africa too, yeah, and so do the Hopi.
And because I have a Kachina doll. I
so
love him.
They're the original pole dancers.
He looks like the original pole dancers. And, you know, he looks reptilian, actually. And I love him. He's my little buddy.
Well, I wonder, you know, the one thing I've been able to do recently is, and I can't go to bed at night and say I want to dream about them and see who they are. I just can't do that. But when I made the discovery that these are clearly aquatic beings, that night I had a dream of UFOs surrounding my family in this beautiful bay at sunset. And then I could see the mermaids under the water, but they were able to move much faster than you can imagine. And they were kind of strobing with energy waves that made them nearly invisible. And in a way, you know, if something moves right in front of your face at even 500 miles an hour, you'd never see it. Because you can't see a bullet coming out of a handgun at 500 or 600 miles an hour. So we know these things can move at least 10,000 miles an hour from the data we have, but I think much faster than that is likely.
I believe too that's why a lot of times we actually miss them.
Yeah, no, you couldn't see anything going by you
because they're going so fast, you know, and we are not, and our eyes are able to.
Well, that's why I think when we do see them, they want us to see them. In my opinion,
correct. They'll slow down.
Yeah, and that begs the question: why are they allowing disclosure? Why did the New York Times start this? And who told the New York Times to start this? And was it Senator Harry Reid? And what is the reason for allowing the public to see that it's true? Finally, that the Senate.
Maybe the ETs told them you've got either you get it done or we will. You know.
See, it could be something like that, where the ETs are telling them, you're destroying the planet, and we're warning you that there's something about to break out here soon if you don't change your ways, because we're polluting the oceans. Fukushima was devastating to the Pacific. The amount of radiation they're dumping in the Pacific to this day from Fukushima in Japan is catastrophic. And maybe they're giving us a warning, and that they're going to, or they could even tell our governments that we're going to appear to the masses, so you better prepare them. I mean, it's possible something's coming next.
That could be. It almost seems like
that's how they appeared over the White House, all those years ago for, what, a week.
That was on the cover of Life magazine. Marilyn Monroe was inside Life magazine. That cover of Life magazine, that was a very clear case. And again, you got to remember, the White House is so close to the East Coast, to the Atlantic, and you wonder if, I mean, one thing Bigelow said that was interesting is you don't have to go anywhere. They're right here on our planet.
Yeah.
And the ocean is the best place for them to hide.
Yeah, I think so too. Cheryl, anything else? You got an A+ tonight.
You got an A+. Jonah and the Whale. Okay.
Well, thank you so much, and like I said, Happy New Year, David, and God bless you with those children. I listened to the show that one night when you did the interview with your children, and you are one heck of a dad. And it was very nice listening to what you had to say, and I hope to speak with you again sometime soon when Michael has you on.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you for the call.
Thank you for participating.
Well, you're welcome, and Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, Cheryl. All right, bye-bye.
Take care.
Boy, she got a good one there, and
I know, and that's where people are brilliant, and I never would have thought of this. Now I've got, the story of Jonah and the Whale bookmarked in the Bible, and I'm going to go through this like a fine-tooth comb and look for any math. If there's any math in the story of Jonah.
I know you are, too.
Yeah.
All right, let's take our next call here. We'll go to Florida, 941 area code. You are next. Who do we have in Florida?
Hey, this is Joe in Bradenton.
Hey, Joe. Welcome aboard.
Hey guys, just a commentary. Actually, looking for your commentary on a particular aspect of the Tic Tac. I'm just going to go back to that subject for a second.
Okay.
I think, like you and like everyone that's been following this issue, I personally have been following it for about 2 years. I feel pretty fortunate that I'm not in the same boat with some people who have followed this issue for 25 years and had to wait until 2017, December 16th, Saturday, to get the information. I feel pretty lucky that, I've only been into this and following it for 2 years, and I got some kind of solid information. But anyway, safe to say I'm excited about everything that's come out over the past year, and specifically since October, the announcement, and then, of course, the New York Times on the 16th and following. However, just to take the devil's advocate position for 1 minute, I am not a John Lear fan. I don't agree with virtually anything that he says. However, I am skeptical about one thing about that particular video with the Tic Tac, and that is this. The statement by the pilot that, quoting roughly, there's a whole fleet of them. First of all, in all of the interviews, and he hasn't done that many, but in the interviews that the pilot has done, particularly with Tucker Carlson, but there's been others. First of all, there's been a big media fail. They've not asked him, to my knowledge. I've not heard one reporter ask him. I've also not seen any print reporters, and I've not even seen any of the best UFO researchers. I would name Grant Cameron, Linda Moulton Howe. Even the best researchers are not picking up on that point. They're picking up on the idea that there's a warehouse with all kind of metals and stuff like that. They're not picking up on that pilot's statement that, oh blank, there's a whole fleet of them. Do you see that? Okay, nobody is pushing the pilot on that. That alone bothers me in terms of the media fail. It also bothers me tremendously that the pilot is not mentioning it himself voluntarily in the interviews. I'll tell you, and this is my last point, and I'll just take your answers off the air. If I was that pilot and I had seen one of these things, obviously it's a life-changing experience. Had there been a whole fleet of them, it's one of the first things that I would mention in an interview. One of the first things. So I don't understand that. I don't understand why.
Well, I can explain it. It's really easy to understand. If you go back to the fighter sweep article, it says right here, what Dave Fravor, meaning the pilot interviewed, didn't know was for the past several days, Princeton had been picking up some bizarre returns on their Death Star-worthy Spy 1 radar on several occasions beginning 10th of November. That's 4 days earlier. The fire control officer and the extremely experienced fire control senior chief had detected multiple returns descending from far above the radar scan volume, somewhere higher than 80,000 feet. So there's mention here of multiples, and that this was going on for at least a week, from what I can gather, in the same spot, they say, in the fighter sweep article. The problem with the press is they don't do their homework, they don't look at all the data, they don't do comparatives on other propulsion systems like I'm doing here tonight, and so they don't really know what to ask. And I noticed the pilot was quite mute when he was dealing with press that was even trying to make fun of him. And I saw some pretty bad press on MSNBC where this young guy is saying, weren't you worried people would think you were crazy? Like, what do you mean? He's in the military. He knows every enemy aircraft by name, make, and number. He knows the speed capacities of all his enemy airplanes. He knows the speed capacities of all his allied jets. So when he sees something that's going way beyond the capacity of everybody, what do you mean, am I worried everyone's going to think I'm crazy? First of all, they have optical, they have radar, and they have forward-looking infrared, and they have visible cam, because the infrared camera can switch from visible to infrared. So they have so much data on these things. It's not like a one-off where you get something on the radar and then it's gone. Okay, they chased them. They saw them hovering above the water. Now that we know that there are 2 other flight crews whom have never been interviewed. That's what it says, and this is when the story originally broke. It broke on March 14th, 2015. This story didn't become famous until it got in the New York Times, and then the senator came forward to acknowledge that yes, we did fund this program in the Pentagon, and we spent $20 million on it, and Bigelow got the contract. So once you have, the senator and testifying that this is real, it all becomes no longer conspiracy. It's really real. But I think that the problem with the press and not acknowledging that yes, there's a fleet of them is just simply their own ignorance and wanting to laugh it off. I saw so much press wanting to laugh this off. You can't laugh at one of these fighter pilots who are this well trained, and then there's 2 fighter pilots, and then there's 2 other crews that we haven't even interviewed.
Well,
yet.
I'll tell you what, if anybody out there knows how to get a hold of these pilots, you could let me know. I'll have them on, and I'll have David back, and
have me question them.
Yeah, I'll have you here with me.
They would love it if someone was questioning them that, first of all, wasn't trying to laugh it off, and second, knew how to go through the data properly. And they would love it, because then they would have a really clear disclosure. I don't even think Tom DeLonge was able to interview them, and even I'm trying to remember his name in the disclosure. The guy who's been interviewed by more than anybody, more than the pilots, is the officer who was looking at the case files, and he's been everywhere, and even he did not go through the fighter sweep article. And again, this fighter sweep article is written by another pilot, Paco Chicheri, and he is very meticulous. What I like about Paco Chicheri is that he goes through the data. He covers everything he can. So you have a full report here. This is what you'd expect in a case like this, not a haphazard job like the New York Times did. So this is good reporting, and I think it's the best piece of data we have. So if you use this on your clipboard, and then you interview Dave Fravor and the other pilot who goes by, in this article, I mentioned his name earlier. He's in here. I just got to find it. So they're south. Okay, here it is. Always over the same spot, at latitude, longitude, some 30 nautical miles off the coast of Baja California, roughly 70 nautical miles southwest of Tijuana. So that puts you at Ensenada, and a little bit south of Ensenada. I went on Google Earth, and then you go off the coast there, and you're roughly right where this incident took place. So this is technically in Mexico, and Mexico yields a wealth of UFO cases because
they get a lot of action there.
Because they don't have it as intimidating of an air force as the United States does. So they're a little less shy. And this is another important point before we get into weapons. And that is that the UFOs don't fire any munitions or any lasers or anything at our pilots. There's no indication that they want to pick a fight. So they're friendly as far as we know. And remember, the pilot had no munitions on board, so he didn't have any active missiles on board. And it's interesting that even came up, considering the UFOs did not intimidate the pilots in any way. So here it is. Lieutenant Colonel Cheeks Kurth is the second Hornet pilot next to Dave Fravor in this article. But then there was another crew, 2 other crews flying out there. And you got to wonder, because Dave Fravor and Cheeks come in 4 days later when they first started detecting these things. So they must have a massive file on these guys. Massive file for days. And they said always over the same spot. And that's latitude, longitude, 30 nautical miles off the coast of Baja, California, roughly 70 nautical miles southwest of Tijuana. So there you go. That's where it took place. Again, the press has not even, zeroed in on that fact.
No, they haven't. Not at all. Anything else?
No.
Well,
that was very David, I appreciate
yeah. So
that.
the other thing about John Lear and what he's saying about the noise. I mean, you can just Google fighter pilot cockpits. Remember, as soon as you get above 15,000 feet, I know this because I was a skydiver, and when you go to high altitude skydiving, as soon as you cross the 15,000 foot line, you need oxygen. So these pilots are wearing an oxygen mask. You can see it in the video, and that air intake makes noise on the microphone, and it picks up the noise. And sometimes it's quiet up there, and sometimes it isn't. So when John Lear is saying that he's a pilot, yeah, he's a pilot. And they're inside the helmet, there's insulation on your earpiece, but not on your mouth. Where the microphone is, there's a lot of noise on the faceplate. So the guy who's talking is going to make some noise. If you're just listening, it may or may not be quiet. Sometimes there's radio disturbances. Sometimes there's magnetic field disturbances, maybe from these craft. I doubt the planes are equipped with a meter that can measure electromagnetic fields. I'd like to see these jets have Gauss meters that can measure up to 10 Tesla. They can measure milligauss, and they can measure Gauss and then Tesla, which is a huge unit of electromagnetic radiation. And if you even reach 1 Tesla, that would be one massive electromagnetic field at a distance from the UFOs. So that would be a good meter for them to install in their planes when they're dealing with things like this. But the arguments of John Lear, I'd really like to talk to him, because I don't know. I remember, being on the plane, getting ready to jump from 30,000 feet and listening to the sound of the air intake, which is different than breathing. So I make a certain amount of noise breathing, and then there's the sound of the air coming in.
Yeah.
And that makes noise. So John Lear was criticizing that it should have been perfectly quiet, and I don't see any videos on YouTube of cockpits where it's perfectly quiet. I mean, there are times it can get pretty quiet, for sure, when nobody's talking. But when guys are talking, as soon as there's 2 or more people talking, there's lots of noise.
Yeah, I didn't find anything that Lear criticized to be credible. To be quite honest with you, at this point, I'm almost leaning towards believing that Lear is still current CIA. I mean, he's either that or he's completely insane. Or a
well, a lot of what he says is true, but there's no doubt that there's some information. I did an interview with Lear years ago when he was talking about a black box on the dark side of the moon where souls are trapped after they die from Earth. And he saw proof of that. And there were many other things that Lear introduced me to, and he had me on the phone on radio shows with other military personnel who were nearing their retirement, who were describing these big black triangles that would land on the runway, and all the employees had to put blankets over their head when these things came down on the ground, and they weren't allowed to see them. There were only a few people allowed to see the giant black triangles that we own and operate. And I was convinced that was true because there's a lot of data there. So it's not that everything John says isn't true. I just don't know why he's on a rampage, because Raytheon themselves admits on their website.
Yep, good point.
Yeah, that this is their equipment. It's not fake. Go to the Mexican forward-looking infrared case of UFOs. Look at those FLIR cameras and notice the noise. See, if you play the video of the Mexican FLIR case, which I put in my Dan Aykroyd Unplugged in UFOs DVD, you can hear the background noise when they're talking on their radios. So there you go. There's your noise that John Lear said shouldn't be there.
I'm not a pilot by any means, but that is what's frustrating about it. Maybe, Michael, you can get a Hornet pilot to call in, because it seems to me that any current or recent pilot of an F-18 can refute what John Lear had to say on all those points, in my opinion. I think his point about their language, the dude and the bro, I think that's garbage too. I think you throw out the protocol out the window when you see something like that, and
You're right.
I wouldn't blame anybody for saying bro and dude if I saw that with my own eyes. So thank you guys. I really appreciate it.
No, I wouldn't.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, you're right. Lear said that was unprofessional of them. Yeah, when you see something that's outperforming you in every way, you're going to lose it, and you're not going to be talking.
I'll tell you what, when I had my sighting close-up, I was running through the grounds of where I lived and screaming and yelling in the middle of the night, and I was out of character. I mean, when you see something like that, I mean, everything changes. All bets are off. I mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, when I saw my UFO in 1968, I was 7 years old, and I was always out of character at 7 years old. But when I saw it, I was out of my skin. I mean, everyone on the street was pounding on the neighbors' doors. Get out here and look at this thing. It was down low. It was a disc. It wasn't like the whale that we're seeing here.
Oh, yeah. And for me, I was screaming and yelling. I'm running underneath. It's up about treetops, this thing, a little higher. Wow. And it's just gliding along.
What was the shape of it? What was the shape?
It looked like 4 tubular objects, and then in between there was structure connecting those tubes, but they kind of blended in with the sky, so you couldn't see in between them really. But and they glowed orange. They had an orange glow to them, no noise, kind of a white light on the back of this thing. And it was huge. I mean, absolutely huge. I would go a couple football fields probably, in the size of this thing. And if I didn't look up, I would have never known it was there, David. It just
Where was that? Where was that?
This was here in Columbia, South Carolina, and I think it was 2013 when Autumn and I seen it. And I just got done doing a show with Robert Stanley, and I came outside to throw some garbage in the dumpster, and I turned her, and I was, at the time I smoked, and I went to light a cigarette, and I caught something out of the corner of my eye, and I just looked up, and there it was. And the light was contained within it. It's like it wasn't shining on nothing. It was bright when you looked at it, but the light was contained. You would have never seen it if you didn't look up. It was...
See, now that's very interesting right there, because when you look at the FLIR photography in this Navy case, you can see the magnetic field with a faint light around it. But when he switches back to infrared, that light, if it had heat, would still be white in the infrared, and it was black. And you could still see the halo, but it was black. So it's some type of light that doesn't have any heat, but yet it's visible. So what you're describing is light that didn't reflect off of other surfaces, right?
Right. I mean, and again, if you have something bright like a helicopter treetop, and there's lights on, that light's going to reflect. It's going to
off the treetops.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying. This is very odd. So you go to the New York Times article, and you look at the two images. One is when the camera switches to day visible, and then one switches to infrared. And you'll see the daylight imagery shows the very faint magnetic field light around it, and then in infrared that disappears into a black. And light is heat. All electromagnetism is heat. And the higher the frequency, the greater the heat, technically. So you wonder why it goes black on the infrared. Now that's mysterious. I mean, the fact that nobody has even really understood that's a mystery. That's a really deep mystery, what kind of light this is. It could be what's known as negative light, because electromagnetism is positive energy. And it could be some type of negative light that we don't really understand very well. But But that's a very good thing you just brought out in your own observation, in your own case, that needs a lot more understanding. Light that doesn't reflect. There was one case where Nikola Tesla lit up his entire lab with a witness, and there were no light bulbs anywhere.
Holy smokes!
And it didn't reflect off of anything, as I recall. This was I don't know if I'd even find that on the internet. I read that in a book.
Makes you wonder, and the government did go in and take all this guy's equipment and paperwork, and they took everything from him, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So who knows what they've been tinkering with, and then the downed UFOs, you mix, between the two of them, who knows what they've created by now.
Well, we know from the case of Boyd Bushman and the Tesla files, the FBI Tesla files, that the death ray was capable of wiping out an army of 100,000 soldiers, and they could take down enemy aircraft from 200 miles away. And there's no tracer. Now, I have a case that I've been talking about on radio shows of the Space Shuttle Columbia, and we can see from tourist photography, 5 photographs that probably took at least 8 seconds for him to take without a motor drive on his little Nikon camera. You can see this thing chasing the space shuttle, and then it misses the path of the shuttle. It course corrects, turns at 90 degrees, and it's doing about 64,000 miles an hour because the shuttle's doing 12,500 miles an hour. And so in 5 seconds or so, it catches up to the shuttle and hits it. So I get these photographs sent to me from an MIT alumni physicist. He's a nuclear engineering physicist. And they wanted to see my report on the space shuttle. And that included Hanscom Air Force Base and several divisions at NASA, because astronaut Tammy Jernigan in San Francisco confiscated this tourist's camera and all his photos and wouldn't show anybody else at NASA or the Air Force the pictures. So I sent the pictures to all these guys, and then they sent me pictures that NASA took of the space shuttle getting hit. Now, when I zoomed in on the space shuttle in this super high-res photograph, you can see the Space Shuttle Columbia streaking by on February, I think it's the 3rd, 2003, or the 1st, and you can see the pictures from NASA, and you can see 3 UFOs in front of the path of the space shuttle as it's getting hit by this incoming object. Now, NASA on their own website tried to say it was super lightning, and lightning travels at 1/3 of the speed of light, so you can only get I shot 30 frame a second video, and I could see the lightning on 2 frames, so that's a 1/15 of a second. And this incoming lasted for over 8 seconds, and the supposed lightning strike never went away because you could see the tracer. And lightning doesn't leave a tracer. So then NASA covered it up. They showed one photograph on their website saying that super lightning hit the space shuttle. It was a big cover-up. Well, when I zoomed in on the space shuttle, it looked like the Tic Tac in a lot of ways. And it didn't look like the Space Shuttle Columbia at all. And this is from NASA's own photography. And, I can't show those photographs on your show here, but because you don't have, I could send them to you and people could look at them, but there's no doubt when I zoom in on this thing, that is not the space shuttle. And I know a guy who was in Dallas, Texas that day, George Mosman, was at his lawyer's office looking through his Zeiss binoculars, and he saw 2 purple UFOs. Now, right to the right of the space shuttle, the second it's getting hit by this incoming purple chaser, there are 3 UFOs right to the right of the space shuttle.
Yeah,
and
if you drop me the photos, I think that I can
post them.
I could open them up and put them right here on screen.
Okay, so let me.
If you could put them on.
Go in Skype right now. Yeah. I can go quick on this window. Can you pull them out of Skype?
Yep, I could open them right up and then put on my window capture and show everybody.
So here we go. There's the. First of all, I'm going to send you what I call the close-up of the super close-up of the Columbia. Supposedly, this is NASA's cameras. I'm going to send you that one first. and then I'll send you the full res image that came from. This is, and you can see the shuttle streaking by in the second image I'm sending you. The close-up looks like a curvy noodle. It does not look in any way like the space shuttle. And this is from the Johnson Space Center cameras. And I wonder now, I'm so mystified by the space shuttle, these images. So, you know, here's what the Columbia looks like floating in space. That's what it should look like. And then the object that's supposedly the shuttle, there's no way that's the Columbia. Now, here's a mock-up photograph that shows the three tourist photos plus one of the NASA photos, and you can see the thing course correct. And notice that the tracer stays there. Lightning can't do that. So NASA clearly lied. Lightning can't last for 8 seconds. It can't even last for 1 second. So there's no way this guy could have got 5 pictures. And even after the Columbia gets hit in the last photo, the full tracer is still there. That there's no way that's lightning. So now we go to the last image I'm going to send you, and I have a lot more, is you can see from the Johnson Space Center cameras the shuttle streaking by left to right. You can see the incoming purple hitting it, and when you click on that image, right to the right, you'll see the 3 UFOs. And notice that the UFOs don't have streaking, which means, like the space shuttle's burning up on entry and it has fuel, it leaves a streak. The incoming weapon that hits the shuttle has a streak, but the 3 UFOs don't have any streaking. So again, no visible signs of propulsion, just like the Tic Tac. So is it possible, when you examine the close-up, that is not the Columbia that got hit that day that we all saw, because this is a photo from NASA of whatever got hit that day that we were told was the Columbia. Now, I'm telling you this case because there is a possibility from other sources I have that we have tried shooting them down. We know that from Boyd Bushman and the Roswell UFO, and that it's possible that there was no Columbia shot down that day, but we were using a weapon of our own that's very advanced. I mean, the Minuteman missile does 18,000 miles an hour. This thing is doing 64,000+ miles an hour in order to chase the shuttle and hit it in 5 seconds. And the shuttle's doing 12,500 miles an hour. It has to be going 5 times as fast as the shuttle, 4 to 5 times as fast to hit it in that little time, because it starts out way behind the shuttle. So it's got to catch up to it. If it's doing twice its speed, it would take forever to catch up to it. So there you go. There's a case of the NASA space shuttle, Columbia, that was completely covered up. I would post all those images on your...
Oh, I'm putting them all up right now.
And the close-up, I mean, look at that close-up. I mean, that's taken out of the second photo where you can see it's just a little white dot streaking by, right?
Yeah.
So that's supposedly and that's before the Columbia gets hit. So it's not broken into pieces yet, right? And then the Columbia gets hit on NASA's cameras. And let me send you one more of those images. And this, you know, I tried to get this to the New York Times. They are terrified of this story, utterly terrified of this story.
Well, this is some incredible stuff right here. I mean,
yeah, and I've had these photos since 2007, wondering if I should put them in a movie. But the way the world works now is I don't have the funding to make a movie. But in order to do a proper movie on what really happened to the Space Shuttle Columbia, is firstly, I don't know if that's the Columbia getting hit. I mean, it just doesn't look like the Columbia. It may have been a demonstration of a weapon that we possess, and that may be some satellite with its 2 solar panels out, which is kind of what it looks like. I don't know. I don't know what that is. But when I put the Tic Tac up against it, and notice how the Tic Tac has a curve, And when you look at the Tic Tac, we don't know how deep it is, the depth of the structure. So this is a curvy kind of thing that reminds me of a noodle, and if we were looking at it from the top, it might look similar to the Tic Tac. I don't know. Because I don't know how deep that Tic Tac is, because we're looking at the face of it, like the top kind of looking down, and there's a lot of blurred kind of energy on the bottom part of the Tic Tac. So it could be much deeper than we realize. But you see these pictures of the Columbia getting hit. Those are NASA's, the last two I sent you. And the other ones that are really grainy, those are the tourist photos that got confiscated by astronaut Tammy Jernigan. Those photos were confiscated, and I'm using them under the Fair Use Act, where I'm allowed to criticize and analyze his photos and mark them up with all my writing. Even though I don't have the copyright on those, it doesn't matter. Actually, I don't even know if a public person can take a photograph of government property and copyright it, because the space shuttle is public property. It belongs to the American public. So I don't think you can take a photograph of the space shuttle and copyright it.
Yeah, I don't think so either, but
because it's government property. It's public property.
Wow.
So I don't think that photo he took, those 5 photos, those are 3 of his 5 photos there.
Well,
you see how the thing course corrects and turns at 9. You can't turn at 64,000 miles an hour. It would destroy a missile to turn at that angle, at that speed. You can't do it. You can do a gradual turn, but you can't turn like that. Not a 90-degree turn. That would destroy the missile. If that was a missile, it's some type of a weapon, because it hits the target, whether it's the Columbia or some false target.
Space weapons, you think, or
it's space weapon? Yeah. But see, is it a demonstration to show that we can shoot down UFOs? Is it a UFO getting shot down by us? I remember that day. I remember the smell. I was in Sedona, Arizona, lecturing on NASA UFOs, and the smell was very toxic. Very toxic smell. Maybe that's the Columbia, but I don't recognize it as the Columbia. I've looked at pictures of the space shuttle very far away, and it's the silhouette of the shape of the shuttle. That's what it should look like. Yeah. No matter how far away it gets, if I zoom in on it in the photography, it should look like the space shuttle, but it doesn't. So I don't know what got hit that day. I mean, this is a huge conspiracy, potentially huge, because it's NASA, it's the space shuttle Columbia. This should really be a massive story. I was on Coast to Coast talking about this with the photos, and I've done a few other interviews with it on Portal to Ascension, and I put it on Facebook. When I put it on Facebook, immediately people said, NASA's already announced that the space shuttle got hit by super lightning, but they only showed one of the guy's photos, because we know that lightning can't last that long. It just can't. It's not possible.
Yeah.
And super lightning doesn't even look like this. If you look at pictures of super lightning, it has hundreds of little tentacles coming out of it. This is one singular line corkscrewing. I've never even seen super lightning do the corkscrewing maneuver, and then it turns and chases the shuttle and hits it. I mean, I've never seen a single picture of super lightning, which is high altitude lightning.
Yeah, since when does lightning stop and say, oh wait, whoa, wrong way, let me go this way?
Yeah, let me go this way.
So, hey, I've got a few questions here for you before we finish up tonight from the chat room. I want to get to those. Let's see. Please ask David how quantum computing can enable humans to advance into faster than light space travel. Thank you.
Well, faster than light space travel, in my theory, in my galaxy clock that goes way back to the year 2000, is a technology that pulses materials and causes them to literally vibrate at a frequency where gravity doesn't have any impact on them anymore. For example, there's one particle that escapes gravity all day long, and that's light. Light has no mass. So it's a massless particle. It hits the surface of the Earth and goes shooting out into space at the speed of light. Well, gravity can bend the path of photons. It can't pull it back unless you're talking about a black hole. So the theory is that if you can vibrate metals, and certain metals can do this very efficiently. And that's why the second part of disclosure, according to Louis Elizondo, and Louis Elizondo's done most of the interviews on this disclosure. The pilots have only done a few. And Elizondo is saying that they now possess materials from the UFOs. And the material studies of the UFOs, I've done a lot of research into, and I've done a lot of magnetic field testing, are the key to the success of making anti-gravity energy efficient. Boyd Bushman at Lockheed Martin showed me regular aircraft that had anti-gravity drives in them, but they were so radioactive that they would really harm the pilot and they would harm anybody who got anywhere near their experiments. But there's a way to do it with no radiation, and that has to do with the materials the craft are made out of. And so the material investigation into UFO crash retrieval materials is going to be the key. And I know a lot about that subject, and I'm not willing to say anywhere near as much as I know, because I've done a lot of my own testing on all the materials that we possess in the periodic table of elements, and there are a few materials we possess that would work. Okay. So that's very, very key, and that is being talked about in this disclosure process right now, that they possess some materials. What I believe Elizondo's group and Tom DeLonge's group is doing is they're going to release an app that you can put in your phone, and if you have a UFO sighting, you'll punch in the coordinates and you'll tell them where it is. And if they can identify that it's alien and it's not human, then you're giving them the coordinates to shoot it down. Because I think because Congress, the Senate, and the Pentagon can't get into the breakaway civilization, the alternative space program where the real crash retrievals exist, they need their own crash retrievals. So they may have a few pieces right now, but they're trying to get a craft. And I really believe their intention is to get you to use the app, punch in the coordinates so they can shoot it down, because they don't have enough radar. There's not enough radar on this planet to track all the. So they're trying to get you to participate to shoot down.
Well, yeah, why not?
I think that's wrong. I think that's wrong.
Why not? I said this the other night. I said maybe they're finally saying, hey, the public can actually help us on this if we, get them interested. And so Stephen, he sends a question in here. He wants to know if you believe that this disclosure is designed to take the focus away from all the secret space program whistleblowers.
The secret space program whistleblowers, most of them are probably fake. They may have information that is real or partially real. But believe me, if you were part of the secret space program, you wouldn't be able to talk about it anywhere unless they gave you permission.
Yeah, exactly. This is what I tell people. I say, if you're part of something they don't want out and you're talking about it, there's one of two things. You're either going to be dead by morning or you're telling us what they want you to tell us.
Or you're just telling us a big fantasy that you made up. And you decide.
Well, yeah, okay, three options, yeah.
And that's disinformation. You see, when you're telling a lie, it's disinformation. But see, I believe the breakaway space program exists, and there has to be people that are part of it. But why would one of them want to break away from that to tell us all about it? And why would they let that person get away with it? They would just kill them by morning. Like you said, so it doesn't add up. Now, I'm not saying I know for a fact that the people who claim they're part of it are lying. I don't know. Only that person knows if they're telling the truth. But
your common sense tells you that, if these people were really part of that and you come out talking about it and they don't want this information out, I mean, they're going to shut you up. Yeah.
You're dead by morning. But if they want the information to come out because they know it's time, they may test the waters, send these people out into the UFO conferences, and see how people respond to their stories. And if they're not all aghast and in shock, maybe they'll give them a little bit more information. But I'm not sure I buy the current. There are some people, I'm not going to name them, but there are some people speaking in the UFO conferences, and a lot of people in ufology don't believe that these people are telling the truth. However, they're selling a lot of tickets because people want to be entertained by these ideas. I just look at real data. I look at real facts. And I also look at ancient archaeology. I think that I look at mythologies like we did tonight on the ancient Syrians and see if there's a possible connection there. But I ask you this, everybody. If someone was to investigate your life in the future, did you leave scientific proof that you existed of your whole life? Probably not. And so when you see a scientist saying there's no scientific proof, well, just go back to most people's lives by the time they're dead. Did you leave any scientific proof? And the answer is probably no. And when you get to 100 years after you die, believe me, there's nothing. Maybe a couple of photographs, some things you wrote, but some things you wrote aren't scientific proof. And then tell somebody a story about something that happened to you, and then try to prove it. You can't.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that to have scientific proof that there's ETs who are visiting our planet may not be the best question. The best question is, has anybody had an experience with them? And if they claim they have, well, that's artistic evidence, and that is very interesting because somebody said they had an encounter with some ETs, and then when 2 and 3 and then 100 people and 1,000 people say they had an encounter, then that really means something. But it's not scientific. But it's the same thing if I said, I met Madonna and I had a conversation with the rock star Madonna, and somebody said, "Can you prove it?" And I said no, because I didn't take any pictures. But it did happen. I really did. Let's say I really did have a conversation with Madonna, which I didn't, by the way. But the point is, I could even make that story up today and say this is what Madonna told me in her, in her changing room. See, that's the thing about these UFO conferences. They're believing people's stories because they're saying this happened. But maybe it did. I don't know. See?
Well, right. And if you go to these things, basically you're going for the story, and then you're left where it's up to you to determine if it's real or not. And for me, and that's the case with a lot of the guests who come on. Most of them don't have proof, and we just listen to their story. But, I'm waiting for that person who comes on and can prove it. Says, oh, yeah, well, ET's...
But even you, when you told the story of this huge UFO that was football fields in length, see, you're convinced yourself what you saw. You got the proof. But try and convince somebody else that you have proof that you saw it. And even nowadays, if you took a picture of it, someone could say you just did that in Photoshop. And there's so much...
Yeah, you're right. And, there's another one, triangular craft that Autumn and I had seen together as well. And this time we actually she had her cell phone and pretty decent camera on the phone. And she was taking pictures, and it was showing, you could see it when she was aiming up to take the picture. But once after the pictures were taken, you go back and look at the photos, and it's not there. It's just you can't see it. So we sent the pictures off to Robert Morningstar, and he blew them up and all kinds of stuff. And eventually you could see pixels that there's something there. But, you show that.
Nighttime photography is very difficult.
It
and
is.
You're talking about a light that didn't reflect off the treetop. So I don't even know if that's photographable. But the point is, you're convinced you saw the proof that the thing was there.
Right.
But when you try to tell somebody else and you say, well, I don't have any scientific proof, does that mean it didn't happen? No, it did happen because you saw it with your own eyes. And to me, right now, in the age of digital photography and being able to produce fake UFO footage, testimony is 1,000 times better than that.
Yeah, I agree.
1,000 times better. If you have testimony and pictures, great. But these fighter pilots have radar testimony, they have forward-looking infrared testimony, and they have their personal optical experience and testimony. And in this fighter sweep article, and that's stellar. You can't get more testimony than this. Do they have physical proof that the UFO exists? You'd have to shoot it down in order to have physical proof. And then they would hide that physical proof so that then no one would ever see the light of day. So then it would always remain in this status of mystery.
Well, I'll tell you what else would happen too. There'd be this other, if they did show us and say, look, we got one, there'd be a portion of the population that would say, oh, they're going to go with this false ET attack, and this is all ploy. It's their craft, and they're trying to fool us. So.
Yep, and that's another thing I see on Facebook. Everybody thinks it's a false flag, and they're getting us ready for a fake ET invasion so they can stage another war. You know, there are a lot of conspiracy theories out there, but when you see it with your own eyes, you have your own experience, you know it's real. For me, I use technology and frequencies of different star systems based on the NASA data of that star to open up my communication in myself, my own quantum communication, to communicate with those beings. And I've had so many experiences that are so real to me. For me, I prove to myself that it's real. And then I get other people to use my technology, you know, on my website, which is davidserita.net. And they're able to have an experience too, and then the proof to them that they're real and that they've had their own experience becomes real. But you can't, I don't believe you could prove to all the masses of the earth that this is real.
No, and for me, I don't really, you know, I'm a little selfish in that regard, where I'd like to see the world, you know, get their disclosure or believe it or whatever. But, you know, I'm not here to do that. You know, for me, when I tell my story, I could really care less if someone believes me or not, because like you, I know I've seen it. So
yeah, once you know, you know. There's nobody, no scientist can tell you that what you saw was a hallucination, because you know. And that scientist or that doctor can say, oh, you know, all the people who see UFOs, they're all just deluded. They need medication or whatever. But now it's on the New York Times. Now you have Navy pilots. You have a division of, you know, the Senate that is funding this stuff. So now they can't deny it anymore. And that's going to change a lot. You know, whether you believe it's false flag, whether you believe John Lear, I think we're dealing with a case that are aquatic beings that are merman type ETs that probably travel between here and Sirius. And I extrapolate that out of Robert Temple's book, The Sirius Mystery, which is incredibly good science and incredibly good archaeology. And I don't think we should be surprised one bit that our neighbor star, Sirius and Alpha Centauri, have humanoids living on them.
Right.
And we just shouldn't be surprised. And it shouldn't be so hard to accept that there's other life in the universe. It just shouldn't be that hard to accept. The astronomers will be the last ones to know. And
yeah. Well, I've got just a couple more here for you quickly, and then I'll give you the floor. This one is from Joanna, and she asks, David, please ask David, Dr. Lear and Steve Colburn found two implants. One is 10 milligauss and the other is 15 milligauss. What does that really mean, scientifically or in layman's terms?
Well, 10 milligauss is first of all, you measure an electromagnetic field in milligauss. But when you're measuring radio waves, you're measuring in watts per meter squared. Microwaves are radio waves. So the caller's question is about the magnetic field strength that they measured around the tiny little implant. And, you know, that's significant. You can see 5 milligauss. My coils that people buy in my website at davidsarita.net are put out, 400 milligauss all the way to 4,000 milligauss. But if you can detect 5 milligauss against the background, then that's a significant little transmission. But that doesn't mean, if it's transmitting in the radio spectrum, you measure it in watts per meter squared. So,
okay.
Yeah.
All right, and last but not least, Misty asks, please ask the guest if he has used 4th generation night vision goggles. You can see a lot with them.
Oh yeah, I've used those, and when I lived in Sedona, I had access to being able to use those from time to time, and amazingly, when my daughter Alira was born, on October 23rd, 2010, there were UFOs hovering above a nuclear missile base in Montana. It was either Montana or Wyoming. It's on a website, and the exact day she was born. And they turned on and turned off our missiles, and it was, for me, really, really amazing, because I was looking through the night vision goggles that night that the caller was talking about, and looking towards the northwest, which was right in the direction of where that case would have happened. And I saw this UFO come down. It was right in front of Pleiades, I mean between my position and Pleiades, and it made a right-hand turn super fast. Impossible physics for an aircraft to do something like that. So there I was, right at the time she was born. That would have been a few days later, and I saw these UFOs do this through those goggles. So they're a really helpful tool. They're incredibly expensive. I'd love it if somebody would buy me a pair, because I don't have the money to buy a pair of those. But I have used them, when people were visiting me, and they let me use them. Sometimes for like a week, they just left them with me.
I have a friend who stopped by a few months back and came to visit, and he brought some with him, and I'll tell you what, there's nothing like looking through those damn things. And I wish I could get my hands on a pair of those. People say, where is he? He's supposed to be on at 9 o'clock. I'll be stuck out in the field somewhere watching the sky. But David, I'd like to give you the floor to get out anything that you like. And I thank you so much for spending Friday night with us. And I'm looking forward to doing this a few more times throughout the year, if not more. Thank you.
Yeah, definitely, Mike. Definitely. So, yeah, my website is my name. David Sarita is SEREDA .net, davidsarita.net, and my email is davidsarita@hotmail.com if you want to write me. And my products are the energy charged pendants, which people wear. They're treated in something that looks like a miniature nuclear fusion machine, and they're activated gem pendants to enliven your aura, increase your psychic abilities, and increase your superpowers. And they also reharmonize the body from harmful electromagnetic field pollution. And then we have the Lightstream wands, which people are using for all. They're basically the most modern, high-tech, super sophisticated Rife technology for healing the body and experimental healing for cancer, Lyme disease, and all sorts of things that I'm not allowed to legally say it can cure those things, but we have had people have great success with very severe challenges physiologically. It's really Star Trekian technology. And then I have my Vortex coils that are very, very powerful, and we're coming out with the staff of Moses, Isis, and Jesus, which is a staff that is truly an interpretation that Moses' staff was an antenna, which I believe it was. An antenna's height is equal to half a wavelength. So we go on a search for finding the true length to the staff of Moses, which we actually discover, and that staff gets handed down to Jesus. And we can see in the Bible that Jesus says when the disciples go out in the different directions to preach the Gospels, he says, never forget your staff. You can forget everything, but don't forget the staff. That's in the Gospels. And so this staff, I believe, is the same staff. And it's the technology. They were stored in the Ark of the Covenant. The staffs were actually stored in the Ark of the Covenant. which it tells us in the book of Genesis. And so you have to know the true length of the Ark of the Covenant exactly, and you have to have the true royal cubit inch to do that, and that is a nightmare. It took me years to figure this out. And then we charge the staffs with frequencies, and people use them in meditation and prayer. So that's a new one that's just coming out now, so you can just go to davidsarita.net, or you go to my YouTube channel, is Spaceman99 on YouTube, and you can see videos about a lot of this stuff.
All right, fantastic.
Right.
David, thank you so much. And until next time, stay safe and Happy New Year.